My name is Manuel Martinez. I'd like to thank the center. I just moved to New York fairly recently, just before the fellowship, and so it's a good introduction to being in the city. I'm going to read the first few pages of a novel that I've been working on this year and need to work on some more. So, it's called Miami Don't Know. It's the memory of falling off the wall that makes it so I can see things the way they really happened. It's remembering that little bit of time I spent hanging upside down in the air with my legs pointed up towards the heavy clouds that makes it so I can tell what's real and what ain't. It's God who made me fall, so when I remember how those green pine needles were spread out against the sky, I can see things the way God sees them. But I won't tell anybody about what all I know because nobody ever listens. They just think about stuff however they want to. So I keep secret how when I close my eyes and look at the walls, chalky looking rocks slipping past my Sunday shoes, I can see Daddy down in Miami, taking care of the shrimp man who won't get out of bed anymore. And when I remember the Sunday silence, that it was all around me as I fell, I know that as soon as the shrimp man dies, then Daddy's coming up here to get me. But the shrimp man's taken a long time to die. He's been in that bed for so long that his skin ain't red anymore, but so white you can see his veins through it. His bedroom's filled with newspapers and magazines, stacks of them covering every part of the floor except for the dirty strip of carpet that runs from the door to his bed. With my eyes closed, I can look into the dark spaces in the wall that hold bits and pieces of everything I know, and can see Daddy squeezing his way down that narrow path in the shrimp man's room, holding a paper plate with cut up pieces of bologna sandwich on it, and can see how that room's glowing white from all the old lamps that Daddy put in there, all those bare bulbs burning to scare off the roaches and keep them from crawling all over the shrimp man's bed. Daddy looks down at the pieces of sandwich on the plate and thinks how bologna ain't what a dying man should be eating. Daddy thinks he should heat up some soup or make a pot of grits, but the shrimp man won't eat anything except for the bologna sandwiches that Daddy has to cut into tiny pieces because the shrimp man can barely chew. Daddy drops a piece of sandwich into the shrimp man's mouth, and the shrimp man rolls it around in there for a while. He takes a long time to work up enough spit to wet down the bread, and when he tries to swallow, a hunk of bread gets caught somewhere down in there and he starts to choke. Looking down at him, Daddy thinks how one thing he knows he's not going to do is stick his fingers down into that almost toothless mouth. Daddy thinks it ain't his job to save the shrimp man from himself, and if he's going to choke on a piece of bologna sandwich that he didn't have sense enough not to be eating, then he should get on with it so that Daddy can get back to some real work instead of taking care of some old white man who should have been dead a long time ago. And while the shrimp man's choking on that piece of bread, Daddy starts to think that it's finally over. He can feel that land starting to become his, can see the row of tall white buildings he's going to put up on the banks of the cove, and can see the house for us that he's going to build right in the middle of them. While the shrimp man's trying to breathe, Daddy thinks about how he won't tell anybody that he got that land by waiting on an old man hand and foot like a woman, because all the land in the world ain't worth people thinking that about him. If we'd all moved out there like Daddy wanted us to, then Mama could have taken care of the shrimp man, and I could have sold bait, and Daddy could have started planning what to build out there after the shrimp man dies. But because Mama refused to set foot in that house that stinks of mice and roaches and looks like it's about to fall down, Daddy moved out there by himself because the shrimp man wants to die in his house, and he was willing to sign that land over to Daddy to make sure he did. So Daddy thinks about how he'll have to tell people that he cheated the shrimp man out of that land instead. He'll have to say that the old man was so crazy that he signed those papers without even knowing what they said. Daddy thinking that he'll tell folks that he'd simply gotten what was owed to him, that since nobody was going to give him anything to make up for how his people had been kept in chains, then he had to figure out how to take something for himself. But while Daddy's thinking about the lies he's going to have to tell to keep folks from knowing what he's really been doing all this time, the shrimp man coughs up that hunk of bread and starts to breathe again, steady and deep. he swallows that bread back down, and Daddy knows that he'll have to keep on feeding him those pieces of sandwich every day. He knows, too, that he'll have to keep on sticking that pan up under the shrimp man's ass, have to keep listening for that thin, watery slop that gurgles around inside him, winding its way through the shrimp man's belly before dribbling out into the pan. And Daddy'll have to wait, too, for that little bit of piss that doesn't soak into the sheets to snake its way around the coarse white hairs of the old man's swollen sack before it lands into the pan drop by drop, the last one making the pan ring like a bell in that hot, bright room, telling Daddy that it's time to lift those dry white legs so that he can take the pan out and clean it, telling him that he has to keep on waiting for when that land will be his. And it tells me that I'll have to keep on waiting for Daddy to come up here and get me so I can go and live with him. Thanks.